So today's panel, we're going to be talking all about, I guess, the experience of those who have been in business for a while, the ups and the downs, but importantly, how they've used technology to improve the way to see into the future and leveraging off real-time data. It's something that ezyCollect just told us about, the importance of having the information at your fingertips. We've all got it now. We can all access what's going on in our businesses as long as we keep on top of it. But let's talk about how you can really use that and use experience to see into the future, if you will. Could be a bit of a crystal ball this morning. Now, can I get you guys first to introduce yourselves? Tom, we might start with you. I'll let you introduce yourself and what you're going to be talking about today.
Hi, I'm a co-founder of a business called Emma and Tom Foods. We're a healthy drinks and snacks brand based in Australia. We've got about 8,000 outlets now in Australia and about 60 different products, ranging from, of course, super premium fruit juices through to sort of protein balls and vegetable nuts. Awesome. And Mike, yourself, tell us a little bit about your business.
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'm the general manager at Single O. If anyone's ever been around Surrey Hills, our cafe's there. That's where we started in 2003. We grew into a coffee roaster. We've been going for 16 years now. We have roasting facility in Sydney and in Tokyo. Our major business is importing green bean, roasting it, selling it to cafes. We've got strategic retail that supports our brand and customer experience, and of late we've had a growing online business to the home market, selling specialty grade coffee blends, singles and additional products to coffee lovers around the world. Well, not the world, but Australia and Japan.
Mike, I want to talk to you about the Japan thing, because when we did our prep last week, tell me about how it is you went into the market of Japan, because that's a fascinating story. And then how did you deal with having that rapid growth and I guess putting processes in place to deal with that rapid growth?
Yeah, so Japan is a really interesting market. I'm not sure how many of you have any active business or export in the market, but it's very different to here. How do we get into the market? I'd love to tell you that we had a perfect strategic plan to enter the Japanese market, but that wasn't the case. We had a guy called Yu Yamamoto, who was actually our dishwasher at our Surrey Hills store 10 years ago. And he grew up through our business. He became a coffee roaster, and then he became what's called a Q grader, which is like a sommelier of coffee. And then he said, I want to go back to Japan. And we said, okay, do you want to take Single O back with you and start it? And he said yes. And Dion, our founder, often talks about being in a car going to buy a coffee roaster for $5,000. They're probably worth about 50 in the back skirts of Japan somewhere, that we had to convert into a coffee roaster, and that's how we started. We worked with Bills Australia, who at the time were implementing themselves into the market, so good to understand what your customers are doing and what their strategies are. Found that was able to give us some consistent revenue within the market to get us going. Now we've been there 5 years. We've established a pretty strong business, got a team of 8 there. We're opening a retail store at the end of this year. And we've been able to take stock and look at Asia as an opportunity for us and say, okay, how can we expand into South Korea? We've started exporting coffee in December this year. So
it was really people first and almost an accidental market that you weren't aware of. How did you do any research when this, I don't want to say dish hand because by then he was much more well established in your business, but when he approached you and said, look, I'm interested in taking the brand to Japan, did you quickly Google coffee in Japan? What was the process at that point?
Yeah, I think like anything, you do your research. What do people drink? How does it differ? The differences in Japan are that they drink a lot of filter coffee. So in Australia, it's an espresso-driven culture. 80-90% of coffee is espresso-driven. In Japan, about 50% of all coffee is filter, so slow brew method. So that's one of the key differences. I think, to be honest, having the right person who understood the business, understood our brand, and also a strong partner, that was enough of the ingredients for us to say, let's have a crack. Now, it's a bit of a different story.
So now you've got that established brand in that market. Is Japan an example of a good sort of, take-off point for the Asia area?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, South Korea is an hour and a half, an hour 50 flight from Tokyo. Much more similar to the Australian market, actually. It's more espresso driven than the Japanese market. But having a team of 8 people there in Asia allows us to export coffee, to support them with training and education, while we're, a 10, 12-hour flight away. So it's great.
And just from a founder's point of view, how did you, as well as having your own man on the ground, did you find yourself going over there frequently as the founder, or did you build a team over there? I'm just thinking of the practicalities of building a team in an entirely new market. What was the thinking and the process behind that?
Look, the guy, we're very lucky. The guy, Yama, and if you have people in your businesses that you trust, that understand your brand and your customers and your core business, then never let them go. And he's one of those guys. We obviously spend a lot of time over there, regularly meeting with customers and supporting them. But him and his wife together are the ones that made us succeed in that market, which is amazing.
We're going to talk a little bit more later on about finding and retaining good talent, because I think that raises a really good issue with that. Tom, let's turn to you now. Tell me about an example of where you had rapid business growth in a hurry, and then did you start with the right strategy, or did you form it along the way?
No, we've been always, behind the 8 ball. We put in JCurve now. Would have been 5 years ago and probably 4 years too late. So we've been working on, at that point, running a better business. So putting in JCurve, adding on DSD to get the systems up and running and being really slick so we operate like a big company. And right now the priority's been brand, which has sort of got left by the wayside. And we've used obviously a really good brand consultant to help us. But some of the insights we've received have been pretty interesting to help us understand what our consumers want, because that's obviously what it's all about, and you've got to work out what they want and then how you coherently message them. And we're reminded of a quote by the ex-CEO of Unilever that data makes your briefcase heavy, but insights make you rich. So we did some work, and what we found out was that 67% of Australians are overweight or obese. But 86% of Australians regard their health as good or better.
There's a slight disconnect there. I just did the quick maths and I realised there was a real disconnect between...
Of 18 and 24-year-olds claim they are more likely to look for organic or natural foods when they go food shopping and prefer foods without any artificial ingredients. More than half millennials expect to find ancient grains in their meals. Of the same cohort, 78% claim to be Sprite to be their favourite drink, and 80% claim McDonald's to be their favourite restaurant. And 40% said that cereal was inconvenient because it means more cleaning up afterwards. So a bit like the last federal election, what people say, what they do is quite disparate. So we've now come back to the point that the brand got away from us a bit. We want to focus on all the other things that are urgent. And we've even realised we've got about 6 different packaging formats, which we think might make people look at a fridge shelf and go, well, hang on, that one's not the same as that one. Is that older stock, or what's wrong with that, etc. So the whole brand coherence thing is obviously highly important. That's where our energy is going now.
And at what point, I think, in your business growth did you realise that a brand strategist was important? Was that someone you already had on the team, or was it because you literally looked at the labels and went, oh my goodness, they're all different and we've got old stock and new stock and we need to get someone in?
Once again, we started off as a super premium juice company. And now like I said, we have milk, we have protein balls, we have nuts, we have kefir water. And as each of those ranges have been developed, we've done a label for them or different packaging, and we realised we needed to address it. And every brand, we're now told in hindsight again, should do a bit of a review every 10 years and tidy up the logo and work out once again what we are. And what we now realise we're in 8,000 spots, so we are readily available, and we're the healthy alternative to the Mars bars and the Sprites. So we're sort of coming to the point that we internally are saying we might be 50% dearer because, of course, nuts and fruit cost more than sugar, but we're 100% better.
Mike, let me turn to you now, and I want to talk about an increase in activity, so an increase in sales. You mentioned that there was a spike in online sales during our prep talk. How did you deal with that? Was it as a result of something that you could predict in the market? And if so, what it was, and then how did you put things in place to deal with that rapid growth?
Can I just say quickly on the health piece from Tom? I was just saying to Alexi before, but in our cafes, just an interesting statistic and why we should all be thinking about health consciousness is 25% of all our coffees sold at Single O Surrey Hills are with an alternative milk. 25%. About 2 years ago, that was about 8 or 9. That's almost a twofold increase over 2 years. That means it's soy, almond. So for anyone who's connected to health or well-being or that factors in their consumer or their customer, you need to be thinking ahead because things are changing a lot faster than before. Sorry.
No, I'm going to ask you a question about that. How do you predict those changes in the market? Is it data-driven? Are you looking at your stats with what people are buying? Are you literally going around to the shops and seeing what the activity is that's happening on the ground?
I think data can support, but I think in that there's a lot of gut of what are the big macro trends in the world, where are people going? I mean, what we've been seeing for the last 5 years is that people are choosing health. Veganism's on the rise. I think 7% of Australia identify themselves as vegan. That's a massive market. Vegetarianism's on the rise. There'll be a lot of you sitting there going, oh yeah, whatever, that's fine. But I mean, 25% is a quarter of our customer base. It's huge. So, I think it's watching what's happening in your stores and understanding, connecting the macro trends to your business.
And then also looking at the data analytics as well.
And looking at the data and analytics, yeah.
Now, Tom, one of the techniques that you have is you utilise your delivery drivers, of which you've got a fairly big base, as data collection points and also part of your team. Can you explain to us how you use those delivery drivers to maybe look at the trends in the market and also balance them as a team?
Yeah, sure. We've got about 40 drivers who see about 3,000 customers every week. And those drivers aren't just people who go and sort of dump stock and run away. They merchandise it, they deal with the customer. To the point if I go out and help them, I'm the one carrying the juice, and they maintain the relationship because it is their gig. So we give them on that trust. And obviously via their mobile handsets and DSD, which talks to NetSuite, we have real-time live information. So if I'm selling one bottle of Green Power in Surrey Hills now, we can sit back at the office and see Green Power stock drop by 1, which is for me a huge difference compared to understanding you had a $40,000 stock loss 4 months ago, which is how it used to be, which is obviously disgraceful. But our previous system couldn't manage stock in more than one location, so it was held together by spreadsheets. Now when we go to the bank, and everyone goes to the bank, you all want more money. Last year we got a massive hit list of requests for a pretty large request of a loan increase. To the point where I think they almost gave it to us saying, well, good luck addressing all that. And our gun CFO basically produced just a 12-tab spreadsheet with everything downloaded from JCurve, which addressed every single question coherently, and they basically said, we can't argue with you. And literally on the eve of the Hayne Royal Commission, we got another $1.5 million. Now, we couldn't have done that.
That's the power of data.
The power of data, and a guy who works at our Champion Data said to me that the head of IMG in Manhattan said to him, man, data, it's the new oil. And for us, it certainly is.
So we're talking a lot about technology, but also I hear a lot in what you're saying in relation to human relationships as well and finding that balance. So Tom, you've given a really good example there where you say the delivery drivers are not just stockists, but they're actually having chats to their clients and getting to know them. Tom, where has relationships been a really important part of your business, maybe in terms of the team that you build underneath you?
I mean, all of our team really have made their own job because it wasn't there before they arrived. It'd be the same in most new businesses. Where we've had a new industry, we've actually installed what's basically a new innovative system of doing sales. So everyone who we've got have made their job and built it up from scratch. So the acquired learning we have in our team is huge, and Emma and I have never ever micromanaged. We can't be bothered. We'll help people all that they need it. If they put their hand up, we give them all the tools they need to do their job. But at the end of the day, it's their job. So that's how we behave.
So you obviously surrounded yourself with brilliant people, and you've hired fantastic staff from the word go. Am I right?
Well, I always said that I'd do less at Emma and Tom's when there's people who can take my job over, and now there's 3 people who have.
Oh, nice, convenient. Mike, have you had the same luck when it comes to people, or have you had to, I guess, search or manipulate the jobs so that they fell into what it is that you needed them to achieve in your business?
Yeah, look, we've been on a. I'm probably not the co-founder not the founder of Single O. I am the guy who was put in to give the owner a little bit more time to relax.
Wow.
So we've been on a massive people, systems and process drive over the last year. We hired a great person from Prosper to run our HR who'd been in a really high growth environment. We did that because a girl called Lauren had been in a really high growth, high revenue, high stress environment. Bringing someone like that into the environment, we've been able to pick up some really good people along the way.
So it's not just about finding people within the industry. You're content to go and look outside your sector to find the right people.
Yep, for sure. I think when we're in our core roles, customer relation roles, we want hospitality focused people who've been on the floor, who understand what it is to serve food, what it is to serve coffee. That's really crucial to us. I was telling you about the test we do with new staff members. We take them into our cafe and we watch them how they interact with our floor people at our cafes. If they're rude or they don't look them in the eye, sometimes we can make an inference that they're necessarily not maybe hospitality people, but they don't understand the rigours, and that's really important. So when we're looking for, our sales reps are baristas, they jump behind the machine. Much like Tom, our delivery drivers can go in, they can fix a grinder, they can fix a machine, they can help dial in coffee, they almost can train a barista. So we look at those customer experience as touch points to impact our customers as opposed to do the transactional pieces. We can drop off coffee, but if you can drop off coffee, fix a machine while they're in service, make sure they're not losing revenue, then that's a far more valuable transaction. Like the ezyCollect team we're talking about, how do you make, when you call up your customer to collect money, a customer interaction? That's how you need to be thinking about it. It sounds crazy, but it's possible.
Tom, what's your top tip for hiring people in a hurry? Do you have any sort of secret ways of doing that?
I mean, similarly, we look at sales, obviously, and once they come on board, if a certain run has been yielding $3,000, say, per day, and a new person comes on board and it's 2, well, there's numbers talk, obviously. Also, we're a very public business. We've got 40 vans and we're in a lot of shops. So our performance is always on display. If you want to get on Twitter, the fastest way I could recommend is to hop in one of my vans and have a cigarette. That always works well. Look after yourself. And those things are reported immediately. So
we do live in that real life reporting world immediate.
I've got a lot of friends. I had a call once years ago from a mate of mine who just said, mate, just watching one of your blokes slipping on a wetsuit at Palm Beach. That was Alejo, who's now gone.
That sounds like our sales team. They often ring me and say, I've just been for a surf with a potential prospect. How did it go? Yeah, we got it. Okay, I hope so.
And knowing sales teams to be the same person.
Exactly.
Same prospect.
Mike, I know one of the things that you talked a lot about was the integration side. So when you're growing at pace and you're kind of tacking things on to solve problems in your business, whether it be, ezyCollect because you've suddenly got a whole problem with receivables or whatever it is in terms of the tech, I suppose when you get to a certain point after a busy period, you end up with a tech stack that doesn't necessarily communicate with one another. Now, you're at that phase at the moment where you've stopped, taken stock, and now starting to integrate with everything. What sort of tips would you give the audience about integrating all of your software once you've worked out which ones you want to use?
Yeah, so we're about, halfway through, I'd say, the integration of all our systems. So, as I said, our core business is wholesale B2B. We run most of that off JCurve and NetSuite. We also run retail stores off Revel, and we run Shopify for our online business. We've got another probably 6 or 7 technology platforms or systems that we use within the business. I think the first step we did actually was step back and not look at the technology or the systems, but look at the customer experience. And you would have heard a lot about this, but we've actually gone into that and looked at it, and that's a lot of hard work. That meant a lot of us in rooms mapping out the current state of all our business processes and flows. Now,
is that a butcher paper thing?
What's that?
When you sit there and you look at all of your flows and the customer relationship experience, are you sitting there with a big whiteboard and your team and working it out step by step?
Pieces of paper about as long as that wall there that map out all our core processes of our whole business. That's the start, current state. How does it look? Where are the opportunities? What are the challenges? From there, I guess what we did was started mapping at future state, white space. How are we going to remap our experience for the customer, and then where do the technologies play within that, and then starting to work with, CTO and technical people to bring that experience to life. That's a little bit of a long process, so you have to be patient. You need to plan. It can be frustrating. It's very easy to dip out and say, no, we're just going to go ahead and get it right, but I think we want to map that correctly. Otherwise, I think what can happen is your systems and your technology drive your interaction with the customer, and I don't think that's the right way to be looking at it. When someone in your business says to you, well, that's how the system works, so that's how I have to look after the customer, I don't think it's the right way to look. You want to be really flipping that and saying, what's the interaction I want, and how does the technology support that? I think that's where JCurve's been great.
I think we've got a lot of businesses in the room who probably think of themselves, well, I've got my immediate customers, but then there's the end user of my product as well. So in a way, you've got customer 1, which is the cafes, and then customer 2, which is the person who's consuming the product. Did you factor in both of those levels when you were doing the experience work?
Yep, for sure. We focused, on our core wholesale customer, and that's quite different to an at-home consumer. An average cafe might go through, let's say, 20 up to 120 kilos a week. A home consumer, you're talking about maybe a kilo every 4 to 6 weeks, so quite different in their usage. A cafe owner versus someone in their home, a very different consumption. So you have to build a slightly different journey, but you're looking for efficiencies between your systems and how you can service similar markets with existing technologies instead of adding on more and more and more to different customers.
Tom, can I ask you about that integration? Because obviously you've got your own systems and then you need to get to speak to one another and integrate for yourselves. But then you've also got your clients' systems that you need to integrate with as well. Is that a harder thing to do when it comes to integrating software?
No, obviously we're onto the Coles and the Woolworths portals, but they're the 2 major client systems we have to deal with. And that's fairly streamlined. We've got DSD, which is our direct sales software, which is loaded onto handpieces. That talks to JCurve. We've done the integration there. We use Shopify for our online sales, and we know we can do a fairly simple plug-in there, which we have yet to but we can do it it's not expensive. We just the volume of sales just doesn't warrant it right now. So we've found the platform now to be fairly well established, and we can now grow really to any extent without any problem at all, barring things like orange juice supply shortages, which there are some of now, which is a seasonal thing. Obviously, it happens to everyone in the industry, but barring things like that, we have unbridled growth scope.
Well, I mean, we all operate in a global economy. Mike, this probably is a good one for you. Have you been blindsided by something like the coronavirus or bushfires or major economic fluctuations or minor economic fluctuations, depending on who you speak to? But do you find working globally that they have a major impact on your business, or is it just something you need to be conscious of?
Look, there's definitely impact in Asia at the moment. People are just concerned. I think people are talking about, I guess, the coronavirus spread, but I guess you've got to think about the flow-on effect of borders being closed and trade being closed and what that means. For us, given that we're in Japan, it's okay. But I guess economic uncertainty is always there, and there's always someone telling you there's doom and gloom. We like to think, and I don't know if this is true, but people always say that coffee is recessionary proof, but I'm yet to see that in action. But I know there's a lot of addicted people to coffee out there. But I think, look, we just try and focus on what we can do, focus on our business, focus on our brand, focus on our customers. Our financial team are mitigating risks where we can. I was speaking to you before, bigger risk for us is probably around award wages and everything that's happening in the industry. Something like that is a far bigger risk to the hospitality industry, and something we can control and contribute to and change. Coronavirus, recession, trade wars, we keep an eye on, but we focus on what we can do and what's important and what we can mitigate there.
Tom, is that the same for you? Do you just keep an eye on it, or do you integrate it into your strategy whenever you sense that something might be changing in a global market?
I mean, we got an email from our Chinese importer last week, and the information he provided, I've not even seen in the papers in Australia. Hotel occupancy, obviously hotels are a major customer, is now between 4 and 10%. Now, as you'd know, there's some.
Is that just in one province or the whole?
He was talking generally. Most companies have laid off their staff on compulsory leave until the end of February. Most hotels would want to sit on about 70% from my experience. 4 to 10%. So it's stopped.
Where do you go to if you haven't got this magical person in China who's giving you the inside knowledge? Where can the typical small, medium-sized business owner find out this sort of information?
Well, like I said, I think it's difficult. I think you've just got to probe and keep on picking away.
Or keep it about your core business and keep on plugging away at that.
I mean, fortunately, we've got a very broad platform. We have our own vans seeing 3,000 customers. We have Coles and Woolworths. We have distributors in the areas that our vans don't cover. We have online sales and export. So we've sort of got a few different plugs.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your insights into technology and rapid growth and the global market and a little bit of everything, especially about your journey when it comes to how to grow your business both internally and externally. We've got about 5 minutes left for any questions that people might have. And both of these speakers, I can tell you from experience, are very open and honest about their business. So if you have any specific questions you'd like to ask about the way they've implemented tech or perhaps dealing with the global market, any questions at all? Yes.
Just curious about, because coffee is a low price product, and where do you procure your beans? Is it South America or is it?
Yeah, so we're a specialty grade coffee company, which means we buy coffee above 85, 86 points. And there's a system called the Specialty Coffee Association, and that's tied to Q grading, which the sommeliers I mentioned. So we pay at a points differential above the coffee C market. So coffee's a widely traded commodity, and as a specialty coffee roaster, we pay a premium to that. That means we buy and source from Africa, so Ethiopia and Kenya, probably the two best producing nations. Central America, obviously Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Guatemala, all around the world, Indonesia. So we're
Mike,
sourcing.
does that change? Does that evolve as the markets change, just from a raw product point of view, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, well, we buy across 2 seasons, which is interesting. So coffee is actually seasonal. There's certain areas in the equator where you can buy coffee all year long, but in general, we're buying. Your Kenyans and your Africans are coming in at the start of the year, and your Centrals and South Americans are coming in at the later half of the year.
Tom, what about you? How does, the global market or that sort of thing affect your raw material purchases?
I mean, we're obviously price takers, of course. We run a system called Net Stock as well, which is a JCurve plugin, and that helps us sort of monitor, obviously, our costing and our pricing. And similarly, just to address the wages issue, that's obviously a real concern now. We've always been very careful of paying above award, and because we also incentivise all of our sales people for bonuses for new accounts, and we pay more for, say, a cash account than on account, and hitting certain sales thresholds, I think that takes them well and truly over their reward. So we have some air there, but obviously it comes at quite a expense to the business.
Yes, well, wages are absolutely one of the most fraught issues for small business, also very much in the media, and a difficult one, a challenge to meet. Mike, were you going to add to that?
I was just going to say to the gentleman's questions, I think actually what we're focused on in our business is the C market, or the commodities market for coffee for the last few years has been really low. Now, we could sit here and say, great, we're getting good prices because we play at a percentage differential above the market. But the problem with that is that the producers of coffee is below the cost of production. So our role as a business, we're a lot better off than a lot of those coffee producers, actually, to help them to have a sustainable business and sustainable business partnerships. So that's super important to us. Otherwise, we won't have a coffee industry. So
people at the core, by the sounds of it. Tom, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, we have these fights with the major grocery stores because we obviously use, in our mind, high-end ingredients, and they come at a real cost, and we call it like the risk of real because it's volatile as well. And when our bars, for example, first went to Woolworths Health Food, they argued that they couldn't sell a bar for more than $2. And we had to tell them that and hold our ground by saying, I'm sorry, it's not a muesli bar. Oats cost about 50 odd cents a kilogram. Nuts and fruit cost up to $5 a kilogram. So they went in at $2.65, and today Woolworths themselves have put them up to $2.95. So we've shown that if you want to, people are prepared to pay more for a quality product, and there is quite a level of price elasticity there.
Yeah, that takes a lot to stand your ground against the big boys like that, because I can imagine that would have a rapid growth impact on your business simply by getting onto their shelves.
Yeah, it does. I mean, obviously, they own the real estate, so you've got to work with them. That's one of the their main challenges. But if you get it right, obviously, it works well for the business.
Fantastic. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, sir. I'd
like to know from both of you, what do you think NetSuite has delivered to you guys that you weren't expecting?
Question was, what has NetSuite delivered to you that you weren't expecting?
Look, it's the engine room of our business, to be honest. It runs our inventory and our accounting. It runs a lot of our customer relationship management as well. I think probably the most surprising was a lot of the inventory builds and things we could do within the NetSuite system, which are quite complicated when we are building up raw materials, packaging, cost of goods, and getting an accurate read on what our actual cost of a blend or a single origin that we import might be. We're bringing in 56 different coffees a year, and so just having a handle on what the margin is of our products and how we can build that up in NetSuite and monitor it's been, I think, having not been there when we first implemented it, I think that's really great to understand what our true costs are of our products we're selling.
I've got another question over here.
Sorry, you both mentioned shop so, what was that process like?
I can tell you, I mean, I've looked into it. Like I said, our volume isn't high enough to justify the spend, but I know fully well from having had a number of conversations for $5,000 that it flicks in, and it's real time, easy. No, because our volume of sales hasn't warranted it.
We're currently doing it right now, so we're just using Celigo actually as a third-party integration tool to do it, and we're looking at Celigo and Jitterbit. I guess we're looking at both of them to integrate across all our systems. That seems to be the better way to go, to be honest, instead of a direct integration, because actually what you want to do is get your other systems talking to some BI tool or central data point. That's where we're sort of going. Yeah.
Just to address your question, I mean, what we can now do, I can look at sales of a certain product by state, by salesperson, by pipeline, be it IGAs versus cafes versus delis, so you can cut and splice things any way you like. So before we put it in, it was like we're living in the 70s but didn't know it. And literally, you know, if we get given, say, one shelf of a Coke fridge, and I want to thank Coke for their network of Australian fridges, what are your best 8 products to put in there? Because you've got one dud, obviously you're underselling yourself by 12%. So we work on our blend, our mix the entire time, and you've got to have the courage then to dump things that aren't trading well and cut them and bring in new products, which obviously consumers want.
It's a really good way to wrap up, actually, because that data and having that real life data is so important to being able to see into the future, which is what today's all about. I'd like to thank you so much, Tom and Mike, for sharing your experiences with us. Let's give them all a round of applause.